The massive orbital station stretched across the darkness of space like a metal city floating among the stars. Lights blinked from thousands of windows and docking bays as ships moved in and out like busy insects. This was Station Nexus 7, the main headquarters for the Galactic Coalition Defense Force, and it never slept. General Vorthak stood on the observation deck of the command center, his massive reptilian frame casting a long shadow across the polished floor. His scales were dark green with silver markings that showed his rank in the Keth Empire. Standing nearly 8 feet tall, with claws that could tear through metal and teeth designed for ripping flesh, he was the perfect example of his warrior race. The Keth had built their entire culture around strength and combat, and Vorthak had risen to the top through countless battles. The war against the Void Swarm had been going on for 3 years now, and every day brought new challenges. The Swarm was unlike any enemy the galaxy had faced before. They were insects, but intelligent ones, who consumed entire planets and turned them into breeding grounds for more of their kind. They had no mercy, no fear, and no desire for anything except to spread across the galaxy like a plague. That morning, Vorthak was preparing for his weekly inspection of new recruits. The Coalition had been desperate for soldiers, reaching out to every species they could find. Some were natural warriors like his own people. Others brought different skills to the fight. The important thing was that everyone contributed something useful to the war effort. He walked down the corridor toward Training Bay 7, where the newest batch of recruits would be waiting. His heavy footsteps echoed off the walls and smaller. Aliens quickly moved out of his way. Vorthak enjoyed the respect that came with his reputation. He had personally killed over 200 swarm warriors in battle, and everyone knew it. The training bay was a huge room filled with equipment for testing new soldiers. Obstacle courses, weapon ranges, and combat simulators filled the space. About 50 recruits stood in neat rows, representing a dozen different species from across the galaxy. Vorthak recognized most of them immediately. The Goroth warriors were easy to spot. They stood nearly 7 feet tall with skin that looked like gray stone and natural armor plates covering their bodies. Their homeworld had heavy gravity, so they were incredibly strong and tough. In battle, they could punch through walls and shrug off energy blasts that would kill most other beings. The Zephyrian scouts were smaller but just as impressive in their own way. They came from a world with thin air and low gravity, so they had developed incredible speed and reflexes. In combat, they could dodge laser fire and move so fast, they seemed to teleport from one spot to another. Near the back stood a group of Pixari engineers. They were only about 4 feet tall, but their bodies were covered in natural technology interfaces. They could connect directly to any computer system and controlled dozens of machines at once. During battles, they coordinated Olgatar strikes and managed supply lines with perfect efficiency. Vorthak nodded with approval as he looked over these soldiers. Each species brought something valuable to the Coalition. The Goroth provided raw strength, the Zephyrians offered speed and agility, and the Pixari gave them technological superiority. Together they made a formidable fighting force. Then his eyes fell on something that made him stop and stare. Standing at the end of the back row was the most pathetic-looking creature he had ever seen. It was small, maybe 5.5 feet tall, with pale pink skin that looked soft and vulnerable. It had no natural armor, no claws, no visible weapons of any kind. Thin brown hair covered the top of its head, and its eyes were a strange blue, color that Vorthak had never seen before. The creature was struggling with its equipment. The standard-issue armor seemed too big for its small frame, and it kept adjusting the straps with thin, delicate-looking fingers. Its movements were clumsy and awkward, like it had never worn military gear before. When it tried to hold the standard Coalition rifle, the weapon looked huge in its tiny hands. Vorthak approached the creature with a mixture of curiosity and disgust. How had something so weak made it through the recruitment process? The Coalition needed warriors, not victims. "What species are you?" Vorthak growled, his voice echoing across the training bay. The other recruits turned to watch, sensing that something interesting was about to happen. The small creature looked up at him with those strange blue eyes. "I am human, sir." "Private Jake Morrison from Earth, reporting for duty?" Vorthak had never heard of this Earth before, but that was not unusual. The Coalition was constantly discovering new worlds and new species. What was unusual was how this human had managed to qualify for military service. It looked like it would break if someone breathed on it too hard. "Human," Vorthak repeated, testing the word. "And what exactly can humans do in battle?" "You have no natural weapons, no armor, no special abilities that I can see. How do you expect to fight the swarm?" Jake Morrison straightened up as much as he could, though he still looked tiny compared to the general. "We adapt, sir. We learn and we survive." Several of the other recruits snickered at this answer. The Goroth warriors flexed their massive muscles, showing off their natural strength. The Zephyrians moved in quick, graceful circles to demonstrate their speed. Even the small Pixari began interfacing with nearby computers, their natural technology connections glowing with bright lights. Vorthak looked from these impressive displays back to the human who just stood there looking ordinary. "Adapt?" he said with a laugh that sounded like rocks grinding together. "Child, adaptation is what prey animals do when they are trying not to be eaten. Warriors do not adapt. Warriors dominate." The human did not respond to this insult. He just continued to stand at attention, waiting for orders. This annoyed Vorthak even more. A proper warrior would have shown some anger, or at least defended their species' honor. "Tell me, human," Vorthak continued, "what wars has your species fought? What great victories have you won? What enemies have you conquered?" Jake Morrison was quiet for a moment, as if he was thinking about how to answer. "We have fought many wars, sir. We have won some and lost others. We have learned from all of them." This vague answer made Vorthak even more contemptuous. "Learned what?" "How to run away? How to hide? How to surrender when real warriors come to fight." The other recruits laughed at this, but Vorthak noticed that the human did not seem embarrassed or angry. If anything, he looked sad, as if the general's words had reminded him of something painful. "We learn how to survive, sir," Jake said quietly. "No matter what happens, we learn how to keep going." Vorthak decided he had wasted enough time on this pathetic creature. "Very well, human. You will be assigned to Squad 12 with the other support personnel. Try not to get killed on your first day." As the general moved on to inspect the rest of the recruits, he put the human out of his mind. The creature would probably wash out of training within a week or get itself killed in its first battle. Either way, it was not his problem anymore, but as he walked away, Vorthak failed to notice the look in Jake Morrison's eyes. There was something there that did not match his small, weak appearance, something that spoke of experiences far beyond what his young face suggested, something that, if the general had recognized it, might have made him think twice about his harsh judgment. The inspection continued, but the human stood quietly in formation, waiting for whatever would come next. He had been underestimated before, and he knew he would be underestimated again. It was, after all, one of humanity's greatest advantages. 3 weeks later, the alarm screamed through Station Nexus 7 like angry metal birds. Red lights flashed in every corridor as soldiers ran to their battle stations. The Void Swarm had been detected moving toward the Kepler system, and the Coalition fleet was scrambling to intercept them. General Vorthak stood on the bridge of the battleship Titan's Fist, watching the tactical display with cold satisfaction. Finally, a real fight. The past few weeks of training exercises and paperwork had been boring. His claws itched for combat, and his warriors were getting restless without fresh enemies to kill. The enemy fleet appeared on the main screen as a dark cloud of organic ships. The swarm vessels looked like giant insects made of metal and flesh, with wings that could fold for faster travel and weapons that shot acidic bioplasma. They moved in perfect formation, controlled by a hive mind that made them incredibly coordinated but also predictable. "Sir, enemy fleet consists of approximately 200 vessels," reported Commander Zex, a blue-skinned Altarian who served as the ship's tactical officer. "They are heading straight for Kepler 3, the main mining colony." Vorthak nodded grimly. The swarm always went for populated worlds first. They needed living beings to feed their reproduction cycles, and mining colonies were perfect targets. Lots of workers, limited defenses, and valuable resources that could be converted into more swarm ships. All ships prepare for battle, Vorthak commanded into his communication device. Gorath heavy assault units to the front. Zephyrium interceptors provide cover. Pixari coordination teams monitor all systems. The coalition fleet moved into attack formation. The massive Gorath battleships took the lead, their thick armor and powerful weapons ready to punch through enemy lines. The sleek Zephyrian fighters darted between the larger ships like silver arrows, ready to strike at weak points. Behind them, the Pixari support vessels hummed with technological energy as they prepared to coordinate the attack. The battle began with a thunderous exchange of fire. Energy beams and plasma bursts lit up the darkness of space like a deadly fireworks display. The Gorath ships hammered the enemy with their heavy cannons, while the Zephyrian fighters danced between laser blasts, striking at vulnerable spots on the swarm vessels. Vorthak watched the combat with professional interest. This was how real warfare should be conducted. Each species using their natural strengths to contribute to victory. The Gorath provided raw firepower, the Zephyrians offered speed and precision, and the Pixari managed the complex coordination needed for fleet combat. As the main battle raged, smaller conflicts were breaking out across the system. The swarm had sent infiltration units to various installations, trying to establish footholds while the fleet was distracted. Most of these were minor threats that local security forces could handle, but one situation required immediate attention. "General, we have a problem at Mining Station Alpha 7, Commander Zex reported. A group of swarm infiltrators has taken control of the lower levels. The station crew is trapped in the upper sections." Vorthak studied the tactical display. The mining station was not strategically important, but it contained several hundred civilian workers who would be killed or captured if the swarm was not stopped. It was exactly the kind of simple mop-up operation that new recruits could handle. "Send Squad 12 to clear the station," Vorthak ordered. "It should be good practice for them." Squad 12 was one of the mixed units that had been formed from recent recruits. It contained a Gorath warrior named Ben Rodriguez, a Zephyrian, scout called Lisa Chun, 2 Pixari engineers, and that pathetic human Jake Morrison. Vorthak had assigned the human to this squad, hoping that combat experience would either toughen him up or get him killed quickly. The squad's transport ship docked with the mining station 30 minutes later. Through the ship's communication system, Vorthak could monitor their progress as they moved through the station's corridors. The Gorath warrior Ben took the lead, his massive frame filling the narrow hallways as he checked each room for enemies. The Zephyrian scout Lisa moved ahead to gather information, her enhanced senses detecting heat signatures and movement patterns. The human Jake Morrison followed behind them, carrying the standard coalition rifle and looking as small and helpless as ever. Vorthak wondered why the creature had even been given a weapon. It would probably just get in the way when real fighting started. The squad made steady progress through the upper levels of the station. They found several groups of trapped miners and escorted them to safety. The Pixari engineers worked to restore power to critical systems while the others provided security. Everything was going according to plan. Then they reached the lower levels, and everything changed. The swarm infiltrators were not the usual worker drones that most people expected. They were Void Warriors, elite soldiers of the swarm with enhanced combat abilities and adaptive armor. These creatures were designed specifically to fight other warriors, and they had been waiting in ambush. The attack came from 3 directions at once. Void Warriors emerged from ventilation shafts, maintenance tunnels, and hidden storage areas. Their bioplasma weapons filled the air with deadly green energy while their claws scraped against metal walls as they moved. Ben Rodriguez, the Gorath warrior, charged forward with a roar that shook the station. His natural strength and armor made him nearly invulnerable to normal attacks, but the Void Warriors were not normal enemies. They coordinated their fire, targeting the weak points in his armor and forcing him to take cover behind an overturned mining cart. Lisa Shun, the Zephyrian scout, tried to use her speed to flank the enemy. She moved so fast that she seemed to blur, but the Void Warriors adapted to her tactics within seconds. They spread out to cover all possible escape routes and began firing prediction shots at where she would be rather than where she was. The Pixari engineers attempted to use the station's automated systems against the invaders. They connected to the environmental controls and tried to flood the area with toxic gas, but the Void Warriors had already adapted to the station's atmosphere. Their biosuits protected them from chemical attacks within minutes. Squad 12 was pinned down and taking heavy casualties. The Void Warriors were too well coordinated and too adaptive for standard coalition tactics to work. They seemed to learn from every attack and adjust their defenses accordingly. Vorthak watched the battle feeds with growing concern. This was supposed to be a simple mission, but his soldiers were being systematically destroyed by enemies who should have been easy to defeat. He was about to order a retreat when something unexpected happened. The human Jake Morrison began to move, but he did not move like the other soldiers. While Ben Rodriguez tried to overpower the enemy and Lisa Shun attempted to outrun them, Jake Morrison seemed to study the situation like he was solving a puzzle. He looked at the station's layout, the enemy positions, and the available resources with the cold calculation of a predator, evaluating its prey. Then he started doing things that made no sense according to standard military doctrine. He took pipes from the walls and used them to redirect the enemy's plasma fire. He triggered controlled explosions in the mining equipment to create smoke and confusion. He even grabbed loose debris and threw it at the Void Warriors, not to hurt them, but to test their reaction times and movement patterns. The strangest part was how he seemed to know exactly where the enemies would be before they got there. While the other soldiers reacted to attacks, Jake Morrison anticipated them. He moved like he could see the future, always one step ahead of the swarm's adaptive tactics. Slowly, impossibly, the tide of battle began to turn. The Void Warriors found themselves confused and disoriented by an enemy who refused to follow the patterns they had learned to counter. This small, weak human was fighting in a way that their hive mind could not understand or adapt to. Vorthak stared at the combat feeds in disbelief. The pathetic creature he had dismissed as useless was systematically destroying elite swarm warriors using nothing but scrap metal and pure instinct. It was like watching a child defeat trained gladiators with toys and clever tricks. By the time the battle was over, all 6 Void Warriors were dead, and Squad 12 had suffered only minor injuries. The human Jake Morrison stood among the wreckage, calmly reloading his rifle as if nothing unusual had happened. The other squad members looked at him with a mixture of respect and confusion, clearly not understanding how he had managed to save them all. Vorthak turned off the communication feed and stared out at the stars. For the first time in his military career, he had witnessed something that challenged everything he thought he knew about combat. The human had not won through strength or speed or technology. He had won through something else entirely, something that the general could not identify or understand. Whatever it was not weakness. The days following the mining station incident brought an uncomfortable feeling to General Vorthak's mind. He found himself thinking about the human Jake Morrison far more than he wanted to. The creature's performance against the Void Warriors had been impossible to ignore, but it also made no sense according to everything Vorthak knew about combat. He sat in his private office aboard the Titan's Fist, staring at a datapad that contained Jake Morrison's military file. The information was surprisingly limited for a coalition soldier. Most of the details about Earth and its people were marked with high-level security classifications that even Vorthak's rank could not access. What little information was available described humans as a recently contacted species that was undergoing evaluation for coalition membership. Their homeworld Earth was listed as a Class M planet in a remote sector with a population of several billion. The file mentioned that humans had primitive but functional technology and limited space travel capabilities. None of this explained how Jake Morrison had been able to defeat 6 Void Warriors using improvised weapons and pure instinct. The more Vorthak thought about it, the more questions arose in his mind. How did a primitive species produce soldiers with such advanced combat skills? Why were the humans' tactics so different from standard coalition doctrine? And why did the creature seem to know exactly how the enemy would react before they did it? A soft chime from his door interrupted his thoughts. "Enter," he growled, closing the datapad. Commander Zex stepped into the office, his blue skin slightly darker than usual, which indicated stress among his people. "General, we have received orders for the next major offensive. High Command wants U.S. to assault the swarm stronghold on Zarian Prime." Vorthak nodded grimly. Zarian Prime was a heavily fortified world that the swarm had been using as a staging ground for their attacks. Taking it would be a major victory for the coalition, but it would also be extremely dangerous. The planet was protected by millions of swarm warriors and had natural defenses that made orbital bombardment nearly impossible. "How many ships are they giving us?" Vorthak asked. 50 heavy cruisers, 200 support vessels, and approximately 30,000 ground troops, Zex replied. "The attack is scheduled to begin in 1 week." Vorthak studied the tactical information as Zex transmitted it to his personal display. The assault plan was straightforward but brutal. The fleet would engage the swarm's orbital defenses while ground forces landed on the planet's surface. Then they would fight their way through the enemy's fortifications to reach the primary hive complex. It was the kind of direct assault that the coalition favored. Each species would use their natural advantages to contribute to the victory. The Goroth would provide heavy assault troops, the Zephyrians would conduct rapid strikes against key targets, and the Pixari would coordinate the complex logistics needed for such a large operation. "Sir," Zex said carefully, "there is something else. High Command has requested that all squad leaders attend a strategic planning meeting tomorrow. They want input from field commanders about the assault plan. This was unusual. High Command typically made plans without asking for opinions from lower-ranking officers. But Zarian Prime was such an important target that they were apparently willing to listen to suggestions from anyone who had recent combat experience." The meeting took place in the station's main conference room, a large space filled with holographic displays showing detailed maps of Zarian Prime. Officers from dozens of different species sat around the massive table, their various forms of armor and equipment creating a colorful but intimidating assembly. General Vorthak took his place at the head of the table, while squad leaders filled the remaining seats. Jake Morrison sat near the back, looking as small and out of place as ever among the larger alien warriors. His simple human features seemed plain compared to the exotic appearances of his colleagues. High Command's representative, Admiral Korth of the Centauri Federation, began the briefing by explaining the current situation on Zarian Prime. The planet was covered in dense jungle that provided natural cover for the swarm's ground forces. The main hive complex was built into a series of underground caverns that would be difficult to attack directly. "The primary assault will focus on the northern approach," Admiral Korth explained, pointing to a section of the holographic map. "Our heavy forces will punch through the enemy's outer defenses, while fast attack units strike at their communication centers." Several officers nodded approvingly at this plan. It was logical and played to the coalition's strengths. The Goroth could smash through fortified positions, while the Zephyrians disrupted enemy coordination. The Pixari would manage the complex timing needed to coordinate such a large assault. "Does anyone have questions or suggestions?" Admiral Korth asked. Most of the officers remained silent. In coalition military culture, questioning a superior's plan was considered disrespectful unless you had a very good reason. But after a few moments of silence, Jake Morrison raised his hand. Admiral Korth looked surprised. "Yes, Private Morrison." Jake stood up, looking even smaller next to the towering alien officers around him. "Sir, I've been studying the tactical data, and I think there might be some problems with the current approach." A murmur of disapproval rippled through the room. Several officers exchanged glances that clearly said they thought the human was being presumptuous. General Vorthak felt his own irritation rising. The creature was embarrassing itself and wasting everyone's time. What problems? Admiral Korth asked, his tone indicating that he was being polite rather than actually interested. Jake activated his own datapad and projected a modified version of the tactical map. The northern approach is the most obvious route, which means the swarm will have concentrated their defenses there. They will be expecting a direct assault and will have prepared countermeasures. That is why we are bringing overwhelming force, Admiral Korth replied. Our heavy units can break through any defensive line. Maybe, Jake said quietly, but what if we do not have to break through at all? What if we can make them come to US instead? The human suggestion was met with confused silence. Making the enemy come to you was a defensive tactic, not something you did during an assault. It went against every principle of coalition military doctrine. Explain, Admiral Korth said, his voice showing the first sign of actual interest. Jake manipulated the holographic display, highlighting different areas of the planet. The swarm gets most of their resources from processing organic matter. If we target their food production facilities instead of their military installations, we force them to choose between protecting their supply lines and defending their main base. That is a support target, growled a Gorath officer named Commander Stone. Real warriors attack the enemy's strength, not their logistics. But if you cut off their food supply, their strength becomes irrelevant, Jake replied calmly. A starving enemy is a weak enemy. General Vorthak found himself studying the human's modified tactical display with growing interest. The plan was unconventional and seemed almost cowardly by Keth standards, but it also had a certain logic to it. If the swarm was forced to spread their defenses to protect multiple targets, it would make the main assault easier. There is another issue, Jake continued. The swarm learns from every battle. They adapt their tactics based on what we do. If we use the same direct assault approach that worked in previous battles, they will be ready for it. So what do you suggest? Admiral Korth asked. Jake's fingers moved over his datapad, bringing up recordings from previous battles. We use their adaptation against them. We feed them false information about our tactics. Let them prepare for attacks that never come, then hit them with something completely different. The room fell silent as the officers considered this suggestion. The idea of deliberately misleading the enemy was not new, but the way Jake described it made it sound like a form of psychological warfare that went beyond simple deception. You want us to lie to the enemy? Asked Lisa Chun, the Zephyrian scout from Jake's squad. Not lie, Jake corrected. Misdirect. Make them think they understand our plan when they actually understand nothing at all. Commander Stone shook his massive head. This is not how honorable warriors fight. We should meet the enemy with strength and courage, not tricks and deception. Honor does not matter if you are dead, Jake replied quietly. And tricks only work because the enemy does not expect them. General Vorthak watched this exchange with fascination. The human was challenging fundamental assumptions about how warfare should be conducted. His suggestions were crude and unsophisticated by coalition standards, but they also showed a kind of strategic thinking that was completely alien to most military officers. Private Morrison, Admiral Korth said slowly, your ideas are interesting, but they would require significant changes to our current operational doctrine. Such modifications would need approval from the highest levels of command. Yes, sir, Jake replied, sitting back down. I was just offering suggestions. The assault on Zarium Prime began exactly as planned, with coalition forces moving in perfect formation toward the planet's northern hemisphere. The Gorath heavy cruisers led the charge, their thick armor absorbing punishment from the swarms. Olgachild defense platforms. Behind them, Zephyrian interceptors darted through the enemy fire like silver needles, striking at communication arrays and weapon emplacements. The Pixari coordination ships hung back, managing the complex dance of ships and weapons with mechanical precision. General Vorthak watched the battle unfold from the command bridge, his reptilian eyes tracking dozens of tactical displays at once. Everything was proceeding according to the approved battle plan. The enemy was responding exactly as expected, concentrating their forces to meet the coalition's direct assault. It was textbook warfare at its finest, but something was wrong. Squad 12 had been assigned to a reconnaissance mission on the planet's surface, far from the main battle. Their job was simple: locate and mark swarm supply depots for later destruction. It was supposed to be a safe assignment, well behind enemy lines where they would encounter minimal resistance. That had been 6 hours ago, and they had not reported in for the past 2 hours. "Sir," Commander Zex said from his station, "we are receiving scattered reports of explosions in the southern sector. The energy signatures do not match any of our weapons." Vorthak frowned as he studied the tactical display. The southern sector was supposed to be quiet. Most of the swarm forces were concentrated in the north, fighting against the main coalition assault. There should not be any significant activity in that area. "Are there any of our units in that sector?" he asked. "Only Squad 12, sir," Zex replied. But they were ordered to maintain communication silence and avoid contact with enemy forces. The explosions continued to register on the sensors, growing larger and more frequent. Whatever was happening down there was getting more violent by the minute. Vorthak tried to contact Squad 12 through their communication system, but received only static in response. "Sir," the ship's sensor operator called out, "I am detecting massive disruptions in the swarm's communication network. Their coordination is breaking down across the entire southern hemisphere." This was impossible. The swarm's hive mind communication system was one of their greatest advantages. It allowed them to coordinate millions of warriors across vast distances with perfect efficiency. Nothing the coalition had ever done had managed to disrupt it on such a large scale. "Show me," Vorthak ordered. The main display changed to show the planet's communication network as a web of glowing lines. In the northern sector, where the main battle was taking place, the network was functioning normally. The swarm forces were responding to coalition attacks with their usual coordinated precision, but in the southern hemisphere, the network was collapsing. Communication nodes were going dark one by one, creating expanding areas of silence where swarm forces were suddenly cut off from their central command. Without the hive mind to guide them, individual swarm warriors became confused and disorganized. "How is this possible?" Commander Zex asked. "The swarm communication nodes are heavily defended and built into their primary structures. It would take a major assault force to destroy even one of them." Vorthak studied the pattern of destruction with growing amazement. The communication nodes were not being destroyed randomly. Someone was targeting them in a specific sequence that maximized the disruption to the network. Whoever was doing this understood the swarm's communication system better than most coalition scientists. "Get me a direct line to the surface," Vorthak ordered. "I want to know what Squad 12 is doing down there." It took several minutes to establish contact, and when the communication finally came through, it was filled with static and background noise. Jake Morrison's voice emerged from the chaos, calm and controlled despite the obvious sounds of battle around him. "Squad 12 reporting, sir. We have encountered heavier resistance than expected. What is your situation, Private Morrison?" Vorthak demanded. "And what are those explosions we are detecting?" There was a pause before Jake responded. "We discovered that the swarm supply depots are connected to their communication network, sir. We decided to expand our mission parameters." Vorthak felt his claws dig into the metal of his command chair. "You decided?" "Private, you were ordered to reconnaissance only. You were specifically told to avoid contact with enemy forces." "Yes, sir," Jake replied, "but the situation changed. We found an opportunity that was too valuable to ignore." Another massive explosion registered on the sensors, followed by the collapse of 3 more communication nodes. On the tactical display, Vorthak could see swarm forces in the affected area beginning to wander aimlessly, no longer coordinated by their hive mind. "Private Morrison," Vorthak said slowly, "how many enemies are you currently engaged with?" "Difficult to estimate, sir," Jake replied. The enemy keeps sending reinforcements, but they are having trouble coordinating their response. We have been moving constantly to avoid being surrounded. The communication crackled with the sound of weapons fire and explosions. In the background, Vorthak could hear Ben Rodriguez shouting something in a language he did not recognize, followed by Lisa Shun calling out target positions. The Pixari engineers were making rapid beeping sounds that indicated they were interfacing with captured swarm technology. "Private, you are one squad against an entire planetary defense force," Vorthak said. "How are you still alive?" Jake's response was interrupted by another explosion, this one close enough to make the communication system squeal with feedback. When his voice came back, it sounded slightly out of breath but still eerily calm. "We are not fighting the entire defense force. Sir, we are making them fight each other." Before Vorthak could ask what that meant, the communication went dead. The general stared at the tactical display, trying to understand what he was seeing. In the space of 6 hours, one 5-person squad had somehow managed to cripple the swarms. Communication network across half the planet. "Sir," the sensor operator called out, "the main assault force is reporting much lighter resistance than expected. Enemy coordination in the northern sector is beginning to break down as well." Vorthak nodded absently, still focused on the southern hemisphere. The pattern of destruction was spreading outward from Squad 12's last known position like ripples in a pond, but it was not random destruction. Someone was using the swarm's own communication system against them, turning their greatest strength into a weakness. "Commander Zex," Vorthak said, "I want a full tactical analysis of Squad 12's actions. How are they accomplishing this?" Zex worked at his station for several minutes before shaking his head in confusion. "Sir, I cannot determine their exact methods from sensor data alone. But it appears they are using captured swarm biotechnology to send false signals through the communication network." "False signals?" "Yes, sir. They are making different swarm units think they are receiving orders from the hive mind, but the orders are contradictory. Some units are being told to attack positions that are actually held by other swarm forces." Vorthak felt a chill run down his spine. The implications of this were staggering. Jake Morrison and his squad were not just disrupting the enemy's communication system. They were actively controlling it, turning millions of swarm warriors into weapons against their own forces. "How would they know how to do that?" Vorthak asked. "The swarm bio-communication protocols are incredibly complex. It would take years of study to understand them well enough to create convincing false signals." "I do not know, sir," Zex replied. But the results speak for themselves. The tactical display continued to show the collapse of swarm resistance across the planet. In the northern sector, the main coalition assault was making rapid progress as enemy forces began retreating or fighting each other instead of the invaders. In the south, entire swarm armies were marching toward positions where they would encounter other swarm armies, both groups convinced they were following legitimate orders. It was the most brilliant piece of psychological warfare Vorthak had ever witnessed, and it was being conducted by a creature he had dismissed as weak and useless just a few weeks ago. "Sir," Commander Zex said quietly, "we are receiving a priority transmission from High Command." The main screen flickered and was replaced by the stern face of Admiral Korth. His usual composed expression was replaced by something that looked almost like excitement. "General Vorthak," the Admiral said, "I have just received reports about the situation on Zarian Prime. Can you confirm that Squad 12 is responsible for the communication disruptions?" "Yes, sir," Vorthak replied. "Although I do not understand how they are doing it," Admiral Korth nodded slowly. "General, I am upgrading the classification level of this operation. Everything related to Squad 12's activities is now restricted to command-level personnel only." "Sir, may I ask why?" The Admiral was quiet for a moment, as if deciding how much to reveal. "General, there are aspects of the human species that are not included in their standard files. Aspects that High Command has been evaluating since their first contact with the Coalition." Vorthak felt his suspicions crystallizing into certainty. "What kind of aspects?" General Vorthak sat alone in his private quarters, the classified files spread across his personal display like pieces of a horrifying puzzle. The soft hum of the ship's engines provided the only sound as he read through document after document, each one revealing another layer of deception that had been carefully constructed around the human species. The first file was a complete planetary survey of Earth, and it made Vorthak's blood run cold. The planet was not the peaceful, primitive world described in the public files. It was what Coalition scientists classified as a Class 12 death world, one of the most dangerous environments ever discovered. Earth's gravity was nearly twice that of most inhabited worlds, creating crushing pressure that would cripple beings from lighter planets. The atmosphere contained a highly reactive gas called oxygen that was toxic to many species and could cause fires to spread with terrifying speed. The planet's weather systems were chaotic and violent, producing storms that could level cities, and temperature variations that would kill most life forms, but the environmental dangers were nothing compared to the biological horrors that Earth had produced. The planet was filled with creatures designed for killing. Massive predators with claws and teeth that could tear through armor, tiny organisms that could cause death with a single bite, plants that could poison or trap anything that came near them. And in the middle of this nightmare world, humans had not just survived but thrived, Vorthak read on, his claws unconsciously digging into the metal surface of his desk. The files detailed Earth's history, and every page revealed new horrors. Humans had been fighting each other for their entire recorded history. Not just occasional conflicts over resources, but constant brutal warfare that had shaped their entire species. They had developed weapons that could kill from vast distances, explosives that could destroy entire cities, chemical agents that could poison thousands of beings at once. They had even created weapons capable of destroying their own planet, and had come close to using them on multiple occasions. The numbers were staggering. Earth's human population had fought in thousands of major wars, millions of smaller conflicts, and countless individual battles. They had perfected the art of killing to a degree that no other known species had ever approached. But what made it truly terrifying was that they had learned to enjoy it. The files contained recordings of human military songs, chants that spoke of death and destruction with a gleeful enthusiasm that made Vorthak's scales crawl. They had created entire cultures around warfare, producing warriors who viewed combat not as a necessary evil but as the highest form of art. And these were the beings that had been quietly integrated into Coalition forces as peaceful newcomers, seeking protection. Vorthak opened another file, this one containing detailed information about human military capabilities. What he found there made him understand why the files had been classified at the highest levels. Every human currently serving in Coalition forces was not a simple recruit but a member of Earth's most elite military units. Jake Morrison was not a private who had stumbled into the military. He was a former member of something called Force Recon, an elite unit of human warriors who specialized in operating behind enemy lines. His service record, when properly decoded, showed that he had participated in over 50 combat operations on Earth before volunteering for Coalition service. The file included recordings of Jake's previous missions, and Vorthak watched them with growing horror and fascination. The human moved through hostile environments like a deadly shadow, using improvised weapons and psychological tactics to defeat enemies who significantly outnumbered him. He could survive in conditions that would kill most other beings, and he could turn almost anything into a weapon, but Jake Morrison was not unique among his species. Every human in Coalition service had similar backgrounds. They were all volunteers from Earth's military forces, specially selected for their ability to adapt and survive in alien environments. The Coalition had not recruited random civilians from a primitive world. They had recruited professional killers from the species that had turned warfare into a science. The next file contained information about Earth's current status within the Coalition, and it revealed the final piece of the deception. Earth was not seeking Coalition membership for protection. They were already full members, granted special status after a series of classified negotiations with the High Command. The evaluation period was actually a testing phase, where human military specialists were being integrated into coalition forces to assess their effectiveness against the Void Swarm. Every mission, every battle, every assignment was part of a larger experiment to determine how useful humans could be as weapons against the galaxy's enemies, and based on the results so far, they were very useful indeed. Vorthak found a personal report from Admiral Korth that summarized the human experiment in stark terms. Human units had achieved success rates nearly 3 times higher than comparable coalition forces. They adapted to new situations faster than any other species. They showed creativity and tactical thinking that consistently surprised both allies and enemies. Most importantly, they seemed to actually get stronger and more effective the longer a conflict lasted. While other species became tired and demoralized by extended combat, humans appeared to thrive on it. They developed new tactics, learned from their mistakes, and became increasingly dangerous over time. The report concluded with a recommendation that human forces be expanded and given more significant roles in the war against the Void Swarm. They were not just useful soldiers. They were the perfect weapons for a war that required adaptation, creativity, and an absolute refusal to surrender. Vorthak leaned back in his chair, his mind reeling from what he had learned. The small, weak creature he had mocked on that first day was actually a member of the most dangerous species the galaxy had ever encountered. A being that had been genetically shaped by millions of years of warfare on a planet that tried to kill everything that lived on it. And Jake Morrison was one of the mild ones. The files contained warnings about other human military units that had not yet been deployed. Special forces groups with names like Delta Force and Navy SEALs. Intelligence operatives trained in psychological warfare and assassination. Combat engineers who could destroy entire installations with improvised explosives. There were even rumors of human units called Marines, who were apparently so aggressive and dangerous that they were being held in reserve for only the most desperate situations. The files suggested that these Marines viewed combat as a form of religious experience and became more effective the more hopeless their situation became. Vorthak thought about the battle on Zarian Prime, where Jake Morrison and his squad had single-handedly crippled the Swarm's communication network. That had been accomplished by one reconnaissance squad using improvised tactics and captured equipment. What could an entire army of these humans accomplish if they were given proper resources and clear objectives? The answer was in the final file, a classified strategic assessment prepared by the Coalition's top military analysts. The document predicted that within 5 years, human forces would be leading major operations against the Void Swarm. Within 10 years, they would likely be in command positions throughout the Coalition. Military. The assessment concluded with a chilling observation. Humans do not simply wage war. They perfect it. Every conflict teaches them new ways to kill their enemies and survive in hostile environments. The longer this war continues, the more dangerous they will become. Vorthak closed the files and sat in silence, processing everything he had learned. The galaxy was at war with a species that consumed entire worlds and turned them into breeding grounds for more monsters. It was the kind of enemy that required desperate measures and terrible sacrifices to defeat. So the Coalition had found the most terrible weapons they could imagine and pointed them at their enemies. They had found a species that had spent millions of years learning how to kill, and they had given them targets. The irony was almost amusing. The Void Swarm thought they were the perfect predators, perfectly adapted for conquest and destruction. But they had never encountered anything like humans. They had never faced a species that viewed warfare not as a means to an end but as an end in itself. A soft chime indicated an incoming message. Vorthak opened the communication channel to find Jake Morrison's face on the screen. The human looked tired but alert, and there was something in his eyes that Vorthak had never noticed before. Something that spoke of experiences far beyond what his young appearance suggested. "General," Jake said quietly, Squad 12 reporting mission complete. Zarian Prime is secure. How many casualties? Vorthak asked. None among coalition forces. Sir, enemy casualties are difficult to estimate, but the swarm's resistance has completely collapsed. Vorthak stared at the human for a long moment, seeing him clearly for the first time. Not a weak, primitive creature struggling to keep up with superior alien warriors, but a predator from a species that had turned killing into an art form. Private Morrison, Vorthak said slowly, I have been reading about your people. Something flickered across Jake's face. Not fear or embarrassment, but a kind of sad understanding. Yes, sir. I figured you would eventually. 6 months later, the final battle for the galaxy's freedom began at the Nexus system, where the Void Swarm had built their largest hive complex. It was a massive structure that stretched across 3 moons, housing billions of swarm warriors, and serving as the central command point for their entire invasion force. If the Coalition could destroy this facility, the war would be over. General Vorthak stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the largest fleet in galactic history prepare for battle. Over 1,000 ships from dozens of species had gathered for this final assault. The combined firepower was enough to shatter planets, but the swarm had prepared for this moment as well. Their defenses were unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. The enemy had learned from every previous battle. They had adapted to coalition tactics, strengthened their weak points, and prepared countermeasures for every known weapon. This would not be a battle that could be won through superior technology or overwhelming force. It would require something more. Sir, Commander Zex reported from his station, all fleet commanders are ready for final briefing. Vorthak nodded and activated the communication system that would connect him to every ship in the fleet. On screens throughout the Armada, hundreds of alien faces appeared, representing the combined military might of the free galaxy. But Vorthak found his attention drawn to one particular face in the crowd. Jake Morrison had been promoted to colonel after the Zarian Prime operation, and he now commanded a full regiment of human forces. Over the past months, more humans had been integrated into coalition units, and their impact had been dramatic. Wherever human soldiers served, victory rates increased and casualty rates dropped. But more than that, the humans had begun teaching their tactics to other species. Gorth warriors learned to think before charging into battle. Zephyrian scouts developed patience and cunning to go with their natural speed. Even Pixari engineers began improvising solutions instead of relying only on programmed responses. Fleet commanders, Vorthak began. Today we face the greatest challenge in galactic history. The swarm believes their adaptation and numbers make them unbeatable. They are wrong. He paused, looking directly at Jake Morrison's image on the screen. We have learned much about warfare in recent months. We have discovered that strength comes in many forms, and that the greatest weapon is not technology or size, but the refusal to accept defeat. The human nodded slightly, understanding the message behind Vorthak's words. The general was acknowledging not just Jake's contributions, but the fundamental change in how the coalition approached warfare. The assault will begin in 1 hour, Vorthak continued. All units will follow their assigned objectives. But remember, adaptation is our greatest strength. When plans fail, improvise. When weapons break, find new ones. When the enemy expects one thing, give them something else entirely. The communication ended, and Vorthak found himself alone with his thoughts. The old him would have given a speech about honor and courage, about meeting the enemy with strength and valor. But months of working with humans had taught him that survival was more important than glory, and victory was more valuable than tradition. The battle began with a massive exchange of firepower that lit up the entire system. The swarm's defensive platforms launched clouds of bioplasma that turned space into a deadly obstacle course. Coalition ships responded with every weapon they possessed, creating explosions that could be seen from neighboring star systems. For the first hour, the battle followed predictable patterns. The coalition fleet advanced in formation while the swarm defenders concentrated their fire on the largest threats. Both sides used tactics that had been refined through years of warfare. each trying to gain advantage through superior execution of proven strategies. Then Jake Morrison's regiment made their move. Instead of joining the main assault, the human forces split into dozens of small groups and approached the hive complex from unexpected angles. They used captured swarm technology to mask their energy signatures, making them nearly invisible to enemy sensors. They moved like ghosts through the battlefield, striking at targets that the swarm had never thought to defend, but their real target was not any physical installation. The humans were hunting the swarm's command structure itself. Vorthak watched in amazement as human strike teams penetrated the hive complex's outer defenses. They moved through the massive structure like they had been studying its layout for years, finding weak points in critical systems with uncanny accuracy. Where other species would have been overwhelmed by the alien environment, the humans adapted instantly. "Sir," Commander Zex called out, "the human forces are requesting direct communication with you." "Put them through," Vorthak replied. Jake Morrison's voice came through the communication system, calm and professional despite the sounds of intense combat in the background. "General, we have located the swarm's central control chamber. We need a distraction to keep their attention focused on the main battle." "What kind of distraction?" Vorthak asked. "Something big enough to make them think the real attack is coming from your position." "Can you make them believe you are preparing for a final assault?" Vorthak understood immediately. The humans wanted the swarm to concentrate their defenses against the obvious threat while they struck at the real target. It was exactly the kind of misdirection that Jake had suggested months ago during the planning meeting. "Affirmative, Colonel Morrison. We will give you the biggest distraction we can manage." Vorthak began issuing orders that transformed the coalition fleet into a massive demonstration of force. Every ship concentrated their fire on the hive complex's most heavily defended section, creating a light show that could be seen across the entire system. It looked like the coalition was preparing to throw everything they had at the enemy's strongest point. The swarm responded exactly as expected. They pulled defenders from across the complex to reinforce the area under attack. Their attention became so focused on repelling the obvious assault that they failed to notice the small groups of humans moving through their critical systems. What happened next would be studied in military academies for generations. Jake Morrison and his teams did not try to destroy the hive complex through brute force. Instead, they turned the swarm's own systems against them, using techniques they had developed on Zarian Prime. The humans began feeding false information into the swarm's communication network. But this time, instead of creating confusion among ground forces, they targeted the hive mind itself. The central control chamber contained the organic computers that coordinated all swarm activities across the galaxy. By introducing carefully crafted signals into this system, the humans convinced the hive mind that it was under attack from within. The swarm began to see their own forces as enemies, their own installations as threats. Panic spread through the hive complex as swarm warriors began attacking each other. Command systems shut down or started issuing contradictory orders. The perfect coordination that had made the swarm so dangerous collapsed into chaos and madness within hours. The most powerful enemy force in galactic history had destroyed itself. From the inside, the aftermath of the battle was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. The swarm's remaining forces, cut off from their central command, began surrendering or simply shutting down. Across dozens of star systems, swarm installations went silent as their controlling intelligence disappeared. Vorthak found Jake Morrison in the ruins of the hive complex's control chamber, calmly documenting the organic technology for future study. The human looked tired but satisfied, like a craftsman who had just completed a particularly challenging project. "Colonel Morrison," Vorthak said formally, "on behalf of the Coalition and all free species in the galaxy, I thank you." Jake looked up from his work, and Vorthak saw something in the human's eyes that he had never noticed before. Not the cold calculation of a predator, but genuine sadness for the destruction that had been necessary. "Thank you, General," Jake replied quietly. "I wish it could have ended differently." "How so?" Jake gestured toward the ruined control chamber. where the remains of the swarm's central intelligence lay scattered across the floor. They were just trying to survive in their own way. They saw the galaxy as a resource to be consumed because that was the only way they knew how to exist. If we could have found a way to communicate with them, maybe we could have found another solution. Vorthik stared at the human in surprise. After everything Jake Morrison had done, after all the enemies he had defeated, he still felt compassion for those he had been forced to kill. It was perhaps the most alien thing about humans, and the most admirable. Perhaps, Vorthik said slowly, but some conflicts cannot be avoided. Sometimes the only choice is between survival and extinction. Jake nodded sadly. Yes, sir. We know that better than most. In the months that followed, the galaxy began to rebuild. The Void Swarm threat was over, but new challenges would always arise. And when they did, the galaxy would be ready with weapons forged in the fires of Earth's endless wars. General Vorthak requested transfer to serve permanently alongside human forces. He had learned that true strength came not from natural advantages or superior technology, but from the willingness to adapt, survive, and continue fighting no matter how hopeless the situation became.